Little summer Doc Talk episode here on A to Z Sports with the Bone and Joint Institute. Have Dr. Jeff Watson with us, foot and ankle specialist at the Bone and Joint Institute in Franklin, Tennessee, the region's destination for comprehensive orthopedic and sports medicine care. So book an appointment when you need these guys at boneandjointtn.org. If you're watching on Facebook and YouTube, make sure you hit that like button. That goes a long way for us. This is going to be a really good conversation. And we had, honestly, Easton and I had planned on doing this like for over the 4th of July week. When everybody's taking some vacation time. But the Tyrese Haliburton injury happens in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and so we got to do it now. We got to jump on this. So we have Dr. Watson with us to talk a lot about the Achilles, and what goes into that, the trend in the NBA that we've seen, and also how it applies to Titans center Lloyd Cushenberry, who is coming off an Achilles tear from last football season. So we'll get into all this. But Dr. Watson, first, thanks again for the time. Always good to have a good conversation with you, learning about something with the foot or the ankle that's probably going to gross us out at some point, because everybody knows when the Achilles pops, it kind of rolls up there, and we all see it. Yeah. And they're going to show it a dozen times on the broadcast, but here we are. So welcome in. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks. This is obviously a near and dear topic to our hearts. And actually, Marty O'Malley is who ended up doing both Jason Tatum and Haliburton surgery, who trained me, actually. So spent some time up there. Cool. Kevin Durant had his Achilles. Kind of interesting, like Kevin Durant and Haliburton had a kind of similar course with the calf strain and then an Achilles rupture, which is not that common. So anyway, great. Thanks for letting me be here, and happy to talk about it.
It feels common, but let's first start before we get into the calf strain Achilles pop correlation here. The Achilles. We've talked a lot over the DocTalk history about ankle sprains and ACLs and all types of things, but what's kind of the function of the Achilles tendon? And then if you could maybe update everybody, refresh people's brains on, tendon versus ligament is another thing that I think people get their wires crossed onto.
Sure. Yeah. They're both white pieces of tissue that connect things. So a tendon connects muscle to bone and it helps the bone move. And then ligament connects bone to bone. So it prevents going the ankle from going too far or knee from going too far. So ligaments kind of prevent the bones from moving further than they should. And so the Achilles tendon is specific to the one that goes from your calcaneus, that's your heel bone. And then that helps to attach the muscles like the gastroc and the soleus to the heel. And that allows you to propel yourself forward as you go to walk, kind of pushing off the ground, going up on your tiptoes, things of that nature.
So you mentioned the lack of connection between calf injuries and Achilles injuries. That's, I think you may have seen on Austin and I's face, news to us. We all, maybe just because of the causation has led our minds to think that there is correlation here in the news. And also just I think the logic is, okay, well, they both function with the lower leg. Maybe it's a compensation thing where one is at risk when the other is damaged. So why are we, and apparently the entire internet, wrong about these things having something to do with each other?
Well, I think they do have something to do with each other, but it's just not that like an Achilles rupture. Usually that would be something that would happen with no prodromal symptoms. Like you're not having like Achilles pain or anything like that. It's usually most commonly like a 30 to 50-year-old guy playing pickup basketball on the weekends, not really doing a whole lot.
And then Austin.
He feels this pop and he turns around, there's nobody there. He's like, what happened? That's classic. Like we see that all the time. Now to have a calf strain and then have an Achilles rupture, I think there's got to be something correlated with that. And in all honesty, I think most people, I think the first time I'd really sort of noticed that was after Durant. I don't think I'd really heard about it before anybody else because he had the calf strain. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks later that he tore his Achilles. Mm-hmm. And to me, like sort of thinking about it biomechanically, usually it's a tighter Achilles, a tighter gastroc that sort of lend themselves more towards a tear. And so if you had a strain that sort of like lengthens things out, I would think that would be a little bit less likely to happen. And there was, I can't remember who it was, but there was a sports medicine doctor in California that sort of said, "Oh, this kind of is a thing," and I guess that's one that usually it's a gastroc tear. So it's usually either like the inside half or the outside half. And maybe the connection between the other portion makes it to where you have a little bit more strain on that side of things. And that's where the sort of tear comes from, is it kind of places an increased strain on one half of the tendon, and then it kind of blows that way. But I mean, with Haliburton, that was almost a very similar scenario, trying to play through a gastroc tear and tearing your Achilles. That's very unfortunate. It's so sad.
And I feel like I wasn't watching the game at that point, and I was like, "Oh, I might turn it on." And then I get a text like, "Well, Haliburton already popped his Achilles."
Yeah.
Like, it was so casual. I thought it was a joke, but and it was like everybody felt like they could see that coming. And so this is a little bit different off the wall question that we normally have, but like, I don't know how a person like you and your role would play a part in a conversation pregame with an athlete. Like, hey, what's the likeliness of something like this happening? I don't know how you approach something like that from a medical background, you know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of things out there of research on but when it gets into like playing high level basketball with a calf strain, there is not a lot of great like large study research on that. Like that is very much a intuitive decision. I mean, and certainly now we know there is some risk. It's happened twice in the past few years. I mean, I think that there is definitely some risk involved in that. But those guys are usually up for the task of I'll play through anything if it has a chance of meeting a championship. So I think that there is risk involved, but I think that it doesn't always happen. I think it's reasonable to kind of push through as long as you know those risks in that setting.
Does it always pop at the bottom, or is that just anecdotally it looks that way?
So most of the time it actually pops about the level of the ankle. So it's not quite where it attaches to the bone.
Okay.
It usually happens about the level of the ankle joint, but then the calf muscle kind of pulls everything away. And so usually if you run your finger along the back of their leg, you can actually feel like a little defect that you kind of fall into. So it's pretty obvious.
I'm so squeamish throughout all these conversations.
Another question that just popped into my head that's kind of like a one-off anecdote. Why does it sometimes seem like it doesn't hurt at all, and sometimes guys seem like they're in a ton of pain? Is it supposed to hurt? Does it hurt?
Yeah, initially most guys, if they tear their Achilles, there might be like a day or two that it hurts really bad, but usually after 2 or 3 days, it's swollen, but it's no longer connected, so it actually doesn't hurt you that much. And so people can sometimes miss an Achilles rupture, if they just think it's an ankle sprain and kind of motor through it. And I've seen a few patients that like it's a couple weeks later and you're still limping around, and they finally come in and we figure it out. So they don't get seen for medical care as a result of that, which is a delay in care.
I've heard like the washed up like old man injury Achilles tear. It feels like somebody kicks you, and then like it's just like you get kicked, but it didn't hurt. You just felt something.
It is the most common scenario. Yeah. Like I felt like I got kicked, and then I turn around and there's nobody there. That is like classic.
Right.
Crazy. Something like that. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot, and Easton had when we were on the show Monday talking about, would you play in this situation if you were Haliburton, all this kind of thing. And Easton, you brought up a conversation about the development of the Achilles injury and the timeline compared to some other things like the ACL. So I'll let you kind of take that topic through your brain.
Yeah, and hopefully this makes sense to you, Dr. Watson. It feels like we are every year the medical marvels that we can pull off. Like we have miracles in sports medicine that every time I look up, it's like, how is this guy, running a 40-yard dash 6 months after he tore his ACL? And it feels like there's a number of these injuries that 20, 30 years ago were potentially career-ending injuries, muscles, ligaments, bone breaks, that are now we don't really even worry too much about them and a guy coming back, and the timeline for return is shrinking. It feels like day by day. The Achilles feels kind of like the exception to that. Is there a reason why we haven't figured out the science of an Achilles repair? Why is that still something that can really, because a lot of guys still do not come back the same after they tear their Achilles?
No, you're exactly. I thought Aaron Rodgers figured it out. Is that not right?
Well, that's TBD. That's TBD.
Okay. So I do think that there's some pretty interesting studies that actually look at fantasy points of all things in both the NBA and the NFL. And so they actually looked at guys who tear their Achilles, and then did they make it back to prior level of play, or did they not? And so only a third made it back to prior level of point production.
Man.
A third retired, and then a third like made it back, but not to the same level of care. So I mean, like, that's a big deal. Like a third make it back. Like, and this is probably like a 10-year-old study at this point. So, I don't think a whole lot has changed in that realm, but you're right. It is a big injury. It's hard to come back from. Most of the time in football players or basketball players, it happens like in their early 30s. And so maybe they were kind of at the retirement kind of timeline, like they'd made their money. Stay in the league for 10 years is a big deal. And maybe they're kind of settling at that point. But yeah, you're right. Like kind of pushing the limits of what you're able to do with an Achilles is a little tricky. And you look at Deshaun Watson, who I don't know the exact details, but he retore his probably like in the 2 to 3 month range afterwards, which that's kind of the thing. Like you can push it some, but there is a risk of re-tear either like at the same level or like above the level where you put your stitches. There's that kind of risk. I do think it's kind of a fun time in medicine because we are starting to push those boundaries. And a lot of those things are a little bit anecdotal about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. And so, particularly in football, I think it's pretty fun because the guys all use these accelerometers in their chest pads now. So they know how fast they accelerate forwards, backwards, side to side. So at least for like Tua, when he had his high ankle sprain, they're sort of the guys at Alabama, their sort of decision-making process and going back was when could he accelerate forwards, backwards, side to side where he was before. And that timeline sped him up quite a bit to allow him to get back. And that sort of pushed a little bit of the thinking. So yeah, we're not there, but I think that there are some things that are sort of coming along that are allowing us to probably be a little bit more proactive in that.
Yeah, the tightrope surgery is another one of those that I feel like has come over the lot. Tua was one of the early ones that I feel like made national news and waves there. So, with the Achilles, we've talked about Haliburton, Durant, Tatum, Dame, these basketball players. We've mentioned a couple quarterbacks here, but Lloyd Cushenberry, Titans center, tore his November 2nd or 3rd against the Patriots last year. So we're approaching training camp starts. And the season, I believe week 1 would be 10 complete months since that Achilles injury and surgery. So I guess for a big guy like that, who is still needing to be very explosive, going side to side, weight bearing, all that, as well as other people's bodies on him. How do you see and how do you look at the Achilles injury for an offensive lineman versus some of these other basketball receiver quarterback type of athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a different scenario. I think there is a lot of explosion, force going through that Achilles still in that, but you're not really doing a whole lot of like sprinting, changing directions, except for like a pulling guard or something like that. So I think it's going to be a bit easier, and you can really, those guys are like knee braces, ankles taped all the way halfway up their ankles. I mean, that's going to give him a little additional support that I think that he'll be allowed to kind of progress back a little bit quicker and probably get back to closer to the prior level of play faster than running back, wide receiver, somebody who's sprinting athlete.
Oh, that's another good question. What kind of bracing do you use for an Achilles?
It's interesting. It's a boot. They actually have a kind of a special type of boot called a Vacoped boot that actually is kind of like a hinge range of motion brace. It's kind of nice. So as you go on, you can allow for more flexion to the Achilles, which will sometimes incorporate. But after that first like 8 weeks, usually you're not in any type of brace. There's really like the ankle brace can help some degree more for comfort, but in terms of risk of re-tear, I mean, you don't want to restrict that motion. So you typically don't, there's not a great brace for it.
We talk about how, a number of these guys do come back, but they don't ever quite hit the same level of power or explosion or whatever it is that made them athletically viable. Is that because a repaired Achilles just doesn't have the same strength? Like, what is it about a successful repair that makes it hard for you to return to that level of play?
So I think the two major things in that are, one, the length of the Achilles tendon. So we worry about as surgeons trying to reset the tension, getting that length right, so that if it stretches out, that's going to make you less strong. That's a less of a lever to pull through, basically. So that's a big issue. And then two, there's this period of time where we kind of have to lay a little bit low, rest to get the tendon to heal before we can really push on it. You're going to get some atrophy with that. And that's, debatable amongst surgeons, but somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks to where you can really do strengthening exercises. And so you're going to get atrophy. And studies show that even a year out from surgically repaired Achilles ruptures, there's about a centimeter difference if you measure the calf from one to the other, the non-injured to injured side. So, a centimeter of muscle mass, that probably matters in a top end athlete, and that's probably why they may not be able to get back.
And a calf is like tougher to just you can build your arms back up, right? But a calf, it takes a lot more time to get in the gym and get it going again.
That's really, like you ask me, what's the recovery of an Achilles? It's mainly building the calf muscle back up. It takes like 6 to 9 months to really get there. So.
Yeah. Another question I was thinking of, especially with Cushenberry and being an offensive lineman, is there any concern of being at the bottom of a pile and it's something like something falling on it because you look at or twisting it because of the nature of that position?
Yeah, I think particularly somebody who's going down, their ankle is sort of dorsiflexor pointed up and somebody lands on it, that'll put a good bit of strain on the Achilles. But most piles, your foot's sort of down, that probably is not that big of an effect.
Yeah.
So what does the rehab look like specifically for, I guess, an lineman in particular, but any of these guys? What are the things that they're doing to get back to strength?
Yeah. So early on, you want the tendon to glide. The tendon actually has a sheath or a tunnel that it travels in. So after 2 weeks, we usually hold people still for a couple of weeks to let the incision heal. And after that, you kind of want them to move their ankle up and down to a certain degree to let that tendon glide through the tunnel so it doesn't get stuck down. And then that this is a bit debatable amongst surgeons, but somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks is when you consider doing some strengthening exercises. So like beginning to do calf raises, quite simply, where you go up on both feet and try to just go down on one, something, or like a seated calf raise where you could add weight at a light degree and kind of advance up. And then you kind of need to get to a point where you can balance on one leg pretty evenly, or even do a few calf raises before you can get back to like running, jumping, sprinting. So those top end activities, it usually takes at least 3 to 4 months to get to that point where you can really do those things for most.
So it's a lot more patience needed in that than an ACL, right? Because like in ACL, you're working on some of these leg lifts and raises and everything like 2 days after, surgery, right? This really feels like you have to be patient.
It is a bit more delayed. The interesting thing about Rodgers, so one of the newer trends, like you kind of ask, well, what's new with Achilles? So there's kind of a small incision technique where you can tunnel underneath the skin to pass suture through the tendon, and you can do that above and below and kind of pull them back together. Rodgers had that done at the top end, and then they passed the suture down to the level where the bone is, and they docked the suture in the bone. And so that's sort of the way they recommended setting the Achilles. So that's probably a little bit of a stronger construct. So they may that's sort of one, you might be able to push people a little bit faster with that as sort of a debatable topic in our community. And the Achilles is actually pretty good at filling in. Like it'll usually fill in the defect. It's just a matter of like, did we get it tight enough? And so that's sort of one, a little bit of a nuance it's a bit coming along that still to be investigated.
Yeah, that's something I didn't think about. Is like you have to make it tight enough, not too tight, not too loose. And how do you, with the length of
that sounds like an inexact science. That sounds like you're just eyeballing it, which scares me. I don't like that at all.
Yeah. Well, basically, you can use the other side to know what your tension is like.
Okay, good call.
So, yeah.
So just don't tear both of your Achilles at the same time. Then you'll be guessing.
Make them real tight. You'll be able to
Well, I think this has been really informative. I think the Achilles is something that people are interested in. It's obviously topical in the news right now with the NBA playoffs. And as Lloyd Cushenberry gets closer and closer to training camp, we'll kind of see how much he's out there and to get ready. Maybe a 10-month of complete rehab could be week 1. That's pretty coin flip, right?
Yeah, for sure. Titans need all they can get, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thanks Thanks for the time again today. It's always enjoyable to talk with you. And again, the Bone and Joint Institute, they've got you covered. Hopefully, knock on wood, nobody's out there popping Achilles on the pickleball court or anything like that these days.
Right.
Just be careful with that forward acceleration.
Right.
But appreciate the time, Dr. Watson.
Great. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.